Hello, and welcome to the Sustainalytics podcast. My name is Melissa Chase, and I'm a member of the marketing team here at Sustainalytics. In today's episode, we'll be chatting with a couple of analysts from Sustainalytics Healthcare and Chemicals team about ESG developments in the agrochemical industry. Specifically, we'll be taking a deeper dive into the debate around the herbicide glyphosate and the regulatory implications for companies that produce this chemical. So today I'm joined by Rita Ferreira, Associate Healthcare Research Analyst at Sustainalytics.
Hello.
And also by Anna Bonomi, Analyst as part of the Healthcare and Chemicals team here at Sustainalytics.
Hello.
So thanks, Rita and Anna, for joining me today. First, I wanted to get a little bit of an overview of the agrochemical industry. Like, what's the size of the industry globally, and who are the main players?
Thank you for your question, Melissa. So it's important to note that companies within the agrochemical industry are producing and distributing pesticides and fertilizers that aim to increase the crop's yield. And the industry is dominated by a few players. The latest estimates suggest that there are four big players, which are Syngenta, which was acquired by ChemChina in June 2017, Dow DuPont, BASF, and Bayer, which acquired Monsanto in June 2018. And these big four players collectively control over 75% of the global agrochemical market.
Right. So this looks to be a rather large industry. Rita, you mentioned a couple of acquisitions, the most recent being Bayer's acquisition of Monsanto in June. What's behind this trend of mergers and acquisitions in the industry? And what are some of the risks for companies that are merging?
Thank you for your question. There are several reasons why we have observed this consolidation in the industry. First of all, we have observed recent fluctuations in currencies, crop prices, and crude oil prices. And these have affected the sales and profit margins of agrochemical companies in a negative manner. Additionally to this, the cost of raw materials has also increased, which means that farmers have reduced their spending on crop inputs, and this has translated into lower production and reduced sales for the agrochemical companies. And lastly, it's important to mention that companies are also facing increased shareholder pressure to create value through consolidation as their organic growth has slowed down. The consolidation in the industry comes as a result of companies wanting to increase their margins by benefiting from economies of scale, at the same time lowering their cost of production and increasing the efficiency of their research and development processes. What are the effects of this in the industry? Well, consolidation means that there's less competition. So if only 4 to 6 companies control the market, this can represent an entry barrier to new or smaller companies, which may want to introduce new technologies or products in agriculture. If there are fewer players in the industry, this can also translate into a greater political influence, which can become of concern, especially when it comes to the regulations approval of hazardous chemicals that can impact both our health and also the environment. It's also important to note that consolidation can also have benefits because companies can have access to more research and development resources. For example, and this could translate into social or environmental benefits, depending on the way the company chooses to use these new research and development resources. For example, if a company uses these resources to conduct research on viable alternatives to glyphosate, this could be seen as a positive use of these newly acquired research and development resources.
Right. So M&As obviously hold a number of risks and benefits for companies and their investors. One of the largest M&As in recent history was Bayer's acquisition of Monsanto. So what's your perspective on this recent merger? Anna, maybe you can field this one.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer to this question. So just to give you a little bit of background on this acquisition already in 2016. Bayer, which is a German pharma company which also producing pesticide and crop protection product, announced already its intention to buy Monsanto in an all-cash deal for more than $60 billion. The approval of this acquisition from the different national antitrust authorities was one of the biggest hurdle for this deal, and only in June 2018, so 2 years later, Bayer completed its full acquisition of Monsanto, buying 100% of the company's share capital. This means that basically Monsanto shares are no longer traded on the New York Stock Exchange, and Bayer now is the sole owner of the company. And the brand, the name Monsanto does not exist anymore. Now is the new, everything is under the new entity Bayer. So this was interesting to know, is that this was the largest acquisition in the pharmaceutical company's history, as well as also the largest acquisition by a German company on the international stage, which will of course increase the concentration in what is already very highly concentrated agrochemical sector, as Rita very well explained before. So now Bayer is the world leader for agribusiness, particularly with regards to genetically modified seeds, agrochemistry, and also crop protection.
All right. And now that Bayer is such a large player within the agrochemical industry, what are some of the risks that it's facing now that it's acquired Monsanto?
Yeah, that's a very good point. Whenever we look at this acquisition from the possible, let's say, ESG implications, we expect Bayer to gain an outsized position in the agribusiness, with also like possible significant impact on farmer and consumers, and this would also raise long-term reputational a regulatory risk. And also Bayer's risk exposure, we see that has increased as it acquires Monsanto, which is a company that has already been criticized for a long time for promoting agricultural practices that have been proven to adversely impact humankind as well as biodiversity. A interesting and great example of this increased risk exposure is the debated topic of glyphosate, which lately received quite high media coverage due to two specific events which happened in August 2018, which is the cancer verdict of $289 million against Monsanto, and also the Brazilian temporary ban of all glyphosate-based products.
Right, glyphosate. So, Anna, maybe you can take a step back and explain a bit about the scientific debate surrounding this particular chemical.
So there are multiple scientific studies which link any type of glyphosate-based product to endocrine disruption, also to DNA damage, to cancer in human, and reproductivity toxicity. And the US FDA also found some residue of glyphosate in honey and oatmeal product, including also baby food. And also the Canadian Food Inspection Agency reported that it found trace of glyphosate in more or less 30% of the food which it tested. But the most resilient study was published in 2015, and the study was made by the International Agency for Research on Cancer, which is an arm of the World Health Organization. This agency has classified glyphosate as probable cancerogenic in humans. However, despite all these different scientific studies and evidence, the main national regulators, like for example the US Environmental Protection Agency, or like for example the European Food Safety Authority, they still concluded that glyphosate does not really represent a risk to humankind and biodiversity in case the herbicide is used according to the product labeling. Lately, we have seen some developments on this topic, which are shedding some lights on this scientific debate. First of all, for example, in November 2017, the European Commission decided to extend the license for glyphosate in Europe for another 5 years. And this renewal can be considered short whenever we compare it to a normal and typical 15-year lease.
Okay, so the lease was renewed for 5 years instead of the typical 15 years. So what does that mean for companies that make glyphosate?
This means that possibly European states are preparing themselves to find viable substitute to glyphosate, which would help each state to phase out glyphosate and in the same time keep the same crop yield productivity. We have also observed some countries in Europe, like for example, Italy, France, and Germany, that they are trying to phase out already glyphosate from their economy. And those countries, they are driving the shift. And also, most recent one is that in August 2018, there was something exceptional happen, which is very much likely to have great impact on this topic.
And what was that?
The cancer verdict, which I've already mentioned before, of $289 million, which was made against Monsanto by a California jury. So Monsanto was ordered to pay this amount of money in damages in the first of possible many other US lawsuits over the same topic, so alleged link between glyphosate with killer and cancer. Very interesting to know is that we have already seen an increase in legal risk for buyer following this cancer verdict, because it opened up a floodgate of other similar lawsuits. We notice a sharp increase of similar lawsuits from 5,200, which was reported before the cancer verdict, to 8,700 at the end of August 2018. And this is quite a huge increase, 67% of lawsuits filed against Bayer. Important to also highlight that this was the first verdict and that the company is currently in the process of appealing to this decision.
So given that this is just the first trial that the company is facing and that it's now facing multiple lawsuits with respect to glyphosate, how do you see this playing out for the company?
Yeah, so there are two possible scenarios on this event, on this topic. So first of all, in case Monsanto's appeal will not go through, and this means that the plaintiff will win, this will create quite a big real momentum for other plaintiff, and also Bayer in this case will need to rethink its position. But then on the other hand, if this plaintiff will lose, then Bayer is in a much better position to discourage some of these other cases and lawsuits that are pending. So the next trial is in October 2018. So let's see what it will happen.
Right. Yeah, I guess it's in the hands of the courts. So just going back to the debate over glyphosate, you mentioned all of these adverse effects that have been found with the chemical and these various agencies that have provided some warnings or found residual chemicals in food supply. But how do you explain why this chemical isn't currently banned in most of the world?
Yeah, so that's a very good and interesting question and point. So basically, maybe before answering to this question, it's important also to say that the agricultural sector worldwide is entirely dependent on glyphosate as non-selective herbicides. And as of now, we don't have any viable substitute for glyphosate-based herbicides. So basically, this means that if a ban on the use of glyphosate were implemented, the impact would be highly felt by farmers and the agricultural sector, as the crop yield productivity will sharply decrease. And this would also be translated in a national economy that it would be negatively impacted. So let's take the most recent example, which is specifically highlighting this problem and probably would answer also your question. So in August 2018, there were a federal judge in Brazil which banned the use of any glyphosate-based crop protection product for 30 days, pending the Brazilian government revaluation of the chemical toxicology. However, in September 2018, the ban has been lifted. and the Federal Appeals Court ruled basically that nothing justified the suspension of the glyphosate-based product and that the ban was imposed without previous analysis of the grave impact it would have on the country's economy and on the product production in general. To provide you more context on these events, Brazil is one of the world's largest user of glyphosate, especially in its soybean production system, with the majority of soybean produced in Latin America. And the agricultural product account for almost half of the Brazil's export, and it's the world's biggest exporter of soy. So a glyphosate ban without viable substitute to it would just inflate huge costs on the Brazilian economy.
Right, of course. So, with respect to future restrictions, do you see any risks for the companies that produce glyphosate? Like, if this ban in Brazil was lifted, are other countries looking to limit the use of glyphosate?
Yeah, I would say that whenever Brazil would take the lead and would be able to ban glyphosate, as is the biggest economy, is the biggest basically country more dependent on glyphosate. Yeah, this would be a great example for any other countries which are very much likely to follow the suit and take the lead as well.
Right. Okay. So let's wrap up. But before we do, I wanted to ask about possible solutions for investors who are looking to decrease their risks or their ESG risks, I should say, within the agrochemical industry. What steps can they take?
Thank you for your question. That's a very good point. So, as previously mentioned, a ban on glyphosate would have a significant impact on agriculture production because there's currently no other herbicide in the market that can be considered as a suitable alternative when considering both cost and effectiveness. What we can look at is practices like integrated weed management, which can help reduce herbicide use.
And Rita, what is integrated weed management?
It's basically the control of weeds for a long-term management approach by using several weed management techniques in combination. And these techniques can include physical control, chemical control, and also biological control. Integrated weed management is highly labor intensive when compared to relying on herbicides. So this is a point which should also be considered. Another important trend which is taking place is digital farming. Digital farming tools can help farmers identify which crops are damaged by weeds and pests and spray herbicide and pesticide only in the areas which are affected and therefore reducing overall herbicide use by only applying the chemicals where it's really needed. And the way a robotic weeder, which is the digital farming tool works is first of all, the robotic weeder will scan the crop with a camera. It will identify the weeds and it will only zap the weeds with a herbicide. And what we observe currently is that if digital farming tools continue to be successful, what can happen is that some of the profit, which is currently in the hands of agrochemical companies, can shift to farmers and also to the companies which are actually manufacturing these equipments. And we have seen a response from companies in the agrochemical industry. For example, Syngenta, which produces chemicals and seeds, has pushed for the integration of artificial intelligence into farming tools during its data science competition, which is called Syngenta for Artificial Intelligence Challenge. The issue with digital farming, which companies should also consider, is that it's important to educate farmers so that they are able to use these tools in an effective manner. When engaging with agrochemical companies which are marketing glyphosate-based products, investors should analyze whether and how companies are implementing programs that are aiming to train farmers on the use of glyphosate-based products. Investors can also assess whether companies have in their product portfolio digital farming tools or are considering to invest in such tools in the future. And finally, investors can also analyze and assess if companies are investing in the research and development of viable substitutes to glyphosate-based products, which would provide a solution for this problem.
Great, thank you for that. Sounds like investors do have quite a few options if they're looking to reduce their ESG risks in this area. Thank you so much to Rita and Anna for joining the podcast today. I hope everyone found this quite interesting. If you'd like to have more details about glyphosate risks and what's happening in the agrochemical industry, I encourage you to check out our latest blog post written by Anna and Rita on our website. Thank you again, Anna and Rita, and hope to hear from you all next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.